Welcome, weary traveler, to this video. So, a fun thing about me, I love Souls-likes. Dark Souls is, to this day, one of my most favorite games of all time. I also like mythology and have an interest in religious traditions, especially of the Eastern variety. That's where the focus of my studies was at. So when in 2017 a Souls-like set in Japan came out, I was thrilled. Nioh was a blast, though I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't more of the fantastical as opposed to the historical. Don't get me wrong, all the boss fights were fun and all, but I was kinda sad that the final opponent was Yamato no Orochi, because that's just so basic of a choice. I understand why that particular monster was chosen, and it makes sense given who the antagonist was. But come on, we can surely do something a bit more interesting, no? Well, turns out I just needed to wait a little longer. To 2020, when Nioh2 came out, and oh my god, it has character creator! But also, it doubles down on the fantastical elements, and the resulting mixture feels like it's been made especially for me. Why, you ask? Unlike in Nioh 1, where the story was completely made up, albeit taking place on the background of real historical events and featuring actual historical figures, the story of Nioh 2 is based on an existing Japanese legend, that of Ōtakemaru. And it's precisely this legend and how the game uses it within its own narrative that is the topic of today's video. Yes, I'm once again choosing a topic that interests me and probably no one else, but first of all, none can stop me, and second, I need to make use of my degree somehow. And if you decide to stick around, maybe you'll learn something new. Fair warning, I will be using Japanese terms throughout the entire video, because in some cases the meaning just doesn't fully come across in translation, and more often than not a direct translation is simply impossible due to cultural differences. I will always supply an explanation, and I will also keep a little glossary somewhere on the screen, so hopefully no one gets lost. And with that out of the way, let's do some analyzing, shall we? Spoilers for Nioh 2 and all the DLCs. This is primarily a story analysis, but I will be mentioning the bosses and some gameplay stuff as well. Part 1. The Fearsome Monster in the Mountains. First, let us take a closer look at how the original legend goes. Side note, please remember that legends tend to have variations, and that various retellings differ from each other, sometimes slightly, sometimes significantly. I'm going to talk about the variant I am familiar with, but you may know a version that is different. If you already know how this legend goes, feel free to skip to the second chapter. And with that disclaimer out of the way, once upon a time, deep in the Suzuka Mountains, there lived an Oni. Oni, written like this, is one of the most known but also one of the most blatantly evil creatures from Japanese folklore. The kanji was originally used simply for the spirit of dead ancestor, not necessarily an evil one, but later gained the connotation of something evil and dangerous. The Oni in the Suzuka Mountains was tall and fearsome, with skin as black as charcoal and teeth as sharp as knives. Upon his head sat mighty horns, and on his hands were wicked claws, and so they called him Ōtakemaru, and none dared to cross him, for his power and might was that of a kijin. Kijin, written like this, is usually translated as demon god. It most often denotes a creature so powerful people worship it as god, in hopes of quelling its wrath. That doesn't necessarily mean the creature in question is evil in the moral sense, but more so that it is dangerous, and probably also inclined to violence and murder. And so an alternative translation for kijin is a fierce god. Referring to Ōtakemaru as such is supposed to communicate that he is both extremely powerful and also unpredictable, and going against him is a tall ordeal. Thus Ōtakemaru stole, slaughtered, and destroyed as he pleased. But the capital did nothing about his cruelty, for he stayed in the mountain range and did not venture out. Well, he did kill people who lived near the mountains and also whoever went through the mountains, but those were acceptable losses in the eyes of the emperor, I guess. The mountains were also home to Suzuka Gozen, a beautiful daimyo, meaning heavenly woman, basically just an unearthly beautiful being. In some retellings of the myth, she is straight up a goddess of the mountains, with whom the Oni had fallen in love. She did not return his feelings and staunchly refused his advances, but Ōtakemaru, unsurprisingly, didn't take no for an answer. What is slightly surprising is that he did not force himself onto her, but stuck to probably incredibly awkward courtship. So Suzuka must have had excellent locks on her palace. One day, Ōtakemaru slaughtered a caravan bearing gifts for the emperor and stole all that was precious. The emperor, furious that the Oni would dare disrespect his rule like this, summoned a warrior by the name of Sakanoue no Tamuramaro and ordered him to kill the Oni. And so Tamuramaro gathered a cavalry, 30,000 men strong, and ventured into the mountains to face the Oni in battle. Unfortunately for them, Ōtakemaru was not only strong of arm, but also skilled in magic, and he summoned dark clouds full of lightning and flame that blanketed the entire mountain range. For 7 years wandered Tamuramaro the mountains, and the dark sky rained fire and death unto him. Full of desperation that the Oni was nowhere to be found, Tamuramaro sought the help of gods, and they sent him a dream and a message to seek Suzuka Gozen and ask for her help. Tamuramaro then sent his army back to the capital. Either Ōtakemaru's magic didn't stop you from leaving, or the entire army died, and climbed the highest peak of the Suzuka Mountains. And lo and behold, there was a beautiful palace and a woman more radiant than the dawn. Suzuka welcomed Tamuramaro into her home and agreed to help him with his tremendous task. She warned Tamuramaro that a direct confrontation with Ōtakemaru is ill-advised, for the Oni has in his possession 3 magical swords, and their power protects him from all harm. The only solution to this conundrum is to prepare a trap and rid Ōtakemaru of his swords. And so Suzuka and Tamuramaro did just that. Next time Ōtakemaru came to seek Suzuka's presence, she led him into her palace and put on a desperate act, telling Ōtakemaru how a warrior by the name of Tamuramaro came to harm her and how she needs help, and if Ōtakemaru could maybe lend her his magic swords, pretty please. Now, Suzuka was a good actress and Ōtakemaru was besotted with her, but his brain cells hadn't completely deserted him. So while he agreed to Suzuka's request, he only lent her 2 of his swords and kept one on him. I have to assume the swords worked like stacking buffs, and the less swords Ōtakemaru had, the more susceptible to damage he became, or something. Otherwise, I don't know why stealing just 2 of them worked, but apparently it did, at least to a degree. Ōtakemaru returned to Suzuka's palace later that night, but Tamuramaro was already lying in wait, and the two clashed in the mighty battle that shook the earth and sky alike. Ōtakemaru was cunning and employed many magical tricks, including splitting into 1,000 small Oni, but could not overcome Tamuramaro, for the hero had the blessing of the war god Bishamon. And so Tamuramaro won the battle and cut off Ōtakemaru's head, which was no small feat considering that Ōtakemaru was said to be like 10 meters tall in his true form. Tamuramaro then brought the severed head to Kyoto and presented it before the emperor as a proof of his victory, which the emperor rewarded. He gave Tamuramaro lands to rule over. Tamuramaro also married Suzuka Gozen, and the story would have ended here if their opponent wasn't Ōtakemaru. For you see, Ōtakemaru may have perished in body, but his spirit remained, though he was forced to flee Japan. For some time he wandered, gathering strength, and eventually reformed his body and became a powerful kijin once more. His new seat of power was the top of Iwate Mountain in the province of Mutsu, and from there he spread his terror over the entirety of Japan. The task of getting rid of the kijin for good fell once more to Tamuramaru. Thanks to Suzuka, who knew the layout of Ōtakemaru's previous fortress, Tamuramaru managed to sneak in and prepare an ambush. Then he and Ōtakemaru clashed once more, and once more was Tamuramaru victorious. But this time, when he cut off Ōtakemaru's head, the severed head tried to bite his neck. However, Tamuramaru was wearing 2 helmets, and while the head bit through the first one, it didn't manage to bite through the second one, and Tamuramaru survived the fight. He then brought the severed head once again before the emperor, and this time the Oni stayed gone. And Tamuramaru and Suzuka lived happily ever after, probably. As you may have surmised, the legend of Ōtakemaru is pretty basic as far as heroic legends go. There's an evil monster terrorizing people, there's a courageous noble who heroically slays said monster, and there's a beautiful damsel in distress who gets saved by the hero. It's hard to say when exactly the legend came to be. The story itself takes place during the reign of Emperor Kanmu, in other words in the Heian period, which we know because he is mentioned by name, same as Tamuramaru, who was also a real historical figure. It's most likely that the legend itself is younger. That's how it usually is with folklore. The more consistent written records are from the Muromachi period, or to be more precise, Tamuramaru appears in Otogizoshi, a collection of short stories depicting mostly various folk tales. Suzuka Gozen is tied to several tales, but from the Muromachi period onwards, she is most often connected to the story of Ōtakemaru. Now, let's go back to the Oni and talk about them in a more general sense. As I mentioned before, the kanji originally meant simply the spirit of a dead ancestor, and included both benevolent as well as vengeful spirits. Gradually, the meaning shifted more towards vengeful spirits as the kanji gained a connotation of malevolence, before fully shifting to mean a specific folkloric creature. That, at least, is one of several possible explanations for where the word Oni came from, and why this kanji is used. It's not important to look at all the theories existing, considering the topic of this video, but I am mentioning the specific one for a reason, so keep it in mind. When we look at the folk tales, Oni are always dangerous, cruel, and often much stronger than any man. However, one can overcome them with the help of gods or by tricking them, and thus making them less threatening. To use the legend of Ōtakemaru as an example, there Tamuramaru gets the help of the war god Bishamon, whereas in the legend of Shutendoji, Minamoto no Raiko wins by trickery, though he also receives the help of gods. They give him magic sake that puts Shutendoji to sleep. Oni are also inhuman on many levels, and if they ever appear as people, it's to trick others and bring more harm to unsuspecting innocent folk. Their true forms are grotesque, with colored skin, most often red and blue, but also green, black and white, horns, claws and bulging eyes. Also tusks and fangs, of course. Gotta have those when you feast on human flesh. They traditionally wear a loincloth made of tiger skin, and their weapon of choice is an iron club, often adorned with spikes. So Ōtakemaru with his 3 swords is a special little Oni. And, of course, Oni often wield magic, which adds another layer of perilous danger to any encounter with them. Another consistent Oni characteristic is that they are wild and fierce. They have no remorse for their victims, and they care very little for the destruction they often cause. They make their lairs in caves and on mountaintops. Depending on the story and on how fancy the Oni in question is, they may even have fortresses. In some stories, they are confined to one of Buddhist hells. Not to go on a tangent about the structure of hells in Buddhism, but there are numerous types of hells, in some traditions going up to thousands, with the most well-known system consisting of 8 hot and 8 cold hells, with 4 neighboring ones. One does not go to hell after being judged by some higher power, but as a direct result of one's actions, of one's karma. The Oni, then, are tasked with punishing the most wicked of sinners. It just so happens that sometimes a soul that is irredeemably wicked and cruel transforms into an Oni while still alive. And, well, you can imagine that's not a good thing at all. Overall, Oni are the most horrible of monsters, completely made up for the sake of stories, and that's that, right? Unfortunately, it's not that simple. What is important to remember is this. Oni often played the role of the other in the stories they appeared in. They were wild beasts living in the mountains and thus outside the emperor's rule and needed to be subjugated. There is a heavy undertone of a majority group extending its power over a minority group, which is deemed unsavory. There is a reason why the story of Momotaro, a boy born out of a magical peach who goes to an island full of Oni and destroys them, thus saving Japan, was so popular during the World War II. There is, therefore, a possibility that the character of Ōtakemaru is based on a real person, someone who was outside the emperor's influence. And due to later embellishments and, well, the flow of time, it morphed into the legend we know now and became a part of folklore. I couldn't find any definite proof that this was the case. This theory is based mostly on the fact that the warrior and the emperor in the story were real historical people, and that Tamuramaro fought the Emishi people of northeastern Japan, who the civilized Japanese people viewed as dangerous barbarians. So the possibility is there, but again no proof, so I'm only mentioning this briefly. Whatever the actual history was, the legend as it exists today sits squarely in the realm of fiction. The legend of Ōtakemaru is one of the stories featuring Nihon Sandai Aku Yōkai, the 3 great evil yokai of Japan. Yōkai is a term you may have come across before if you either played Nioh or if you have any interest in Japanese pop culture in general. It is often used as a catch-all term for all the bizarre critters that appear in Japanese folktales, myths, and urban legends. It's a somewhat modern term, though there are records of its usage dating to the Edo era, popularized by Inoue and Ryo in late 19th, early 20th century. Inoue Enryo was, in many ways, a typical Meiji-era philosopher who put modern rational thought above all else. He believed that in order to achieve true modernization, society as a whole needs to get rid of all myths and folk superstitions first. In his mind, all folklore was obsolete, and it was necessary to rationally and scientifically explain everything, thus removing superstitions and allowing society to progress. At the same time, however, Inoue Enryo wasn't denying the existence of true mysteries, things that were truly outside the realm of rational explanation. But to find out the true mysteries, one had to get rid of the fake ones first, which meant getting rid of folktales and superstitions, because in Inoue Enryo's eyes, those were all fake. He spent his life gathering and classifying stories containing yokai, with the sole goal of explaining why none of them are actually true, and unintentionally made sure those stories weren't lost to the march of time and the Meiji government purges. What a guy, huh? Thanks to Inoue Enryo's endeavors, the term yokai gained almost a scientific feel to it, though I'd argue its continued usage is mainly because of its flexibility. Yokai being made of yo, meaning bewitching, but also a calamity, and kai, meaning something suspicious or mysterious, is vague enough to encompass all types of creatures, from talking animals to sounds and visual phenomena. Definitely a convenient term to use, especially when making a video game that's gonna release internationally, huh? But enough of linguistics and history, back to the big evil yokai. The three great evils consist of Ōtakemaru, Shutendoji, and Tamamo no Mae, with the first two being powerful oni, whereas Tamamo no Mae was a nine-tailed kitsune. Where oni are wild and cruel, but very direct in their danger, kitsune are cunning and vicious, though not always. Kitsune, sometimes translated into English as fox spirits, are beings that look like normal foxes, but are capable of magic and, most importantly for majority of stories that feature them, transforming into beautiful women. In some tales, kitsune are messengers of Inari, god of harvest. These good kitsune are separated from the wild ones and do not harm humans. The kitsune that have no master are those that will play tricks on humans given the opportunity and like to mess around with basically anything, really. While kitsune look like normal foxes in most cases, sometimes they have differently colored fur and multiple tails, maximum being 9. More tails equals more power, and the 9-tailed ones are not to be taken lightly. Generally speaking, kitsune fit more into mischievous rather than downright malicious category, though stories about them vary, as I said before. If we take a closer look at the legends which feature the three great evil yokai, we can easily see that the story of Shutendoji is yet another heroic legend about a brave man, Minamoto no Raiko in this case, slaying an evil oni, while Tamamo no Mae's legend is all about how she brought several dynasties in both China and Japan to ruin. In a quick summary, Shutendoji was a powerful oni who liked drinking and also kidnapping hapless citizens from the capital to feast upon. One day, he took a daughter of an important court member, and so the emperor ordered Minamoto no Raiko, or Yorimitsu depending on the reading of the kanji, to slay the evil oni. So Minamoto no Raiko hikes up to Shutendoji's fortress, and because he and his entourage dressed up as mountain ascetics, the oni lets them in. Minamoto no Raiko slips Shutendoji the magical sake, which he got from the gods, and then when the oni falls asleep, Raiko attempts to cut off his head. This endeavor eventually succeeds, but not without some struggle, and of course Shutendoji's severed head tries to bite Raiko, but he is wearing a magical helmet, so he's fine. The story ends with Raiko triumphantly returning to the capital and presenting the severed oni head before the emperor, thus confirming his victory. As for Tamamo no Mae, well, her story just boils down to her being so beautiful and enchanting that she charmed an emperor so thoroughly that she basically took over the imperial court. And because she was a 9-tailed kitsune and therefore had unmatched magical powers, she then proceeded to turn the imperial palace into a place of decadence, debauchery, and just anything evil you can imagine. She was eventually found out and had to flee, but not before bringing the end of a dynasty. And then she did the same thing again and again and again, across countries and centuries. Her last target was a Japanese emperor by the name of Toba, who considered Tamamo no Mae to be a divine being because she was just so pretty. And we all know that pretty people can't possibly be evil, right? But of course, she was eventually discovered and slain for good, though her malice was said to persist long after her death. Well, that's that. I hope your brains didn't explode from overload yet. I swear all of this will be relevant later. It's interesting that out of the three, it's the story of Ōtakemaru that lost a lot of its popularity throughout the ages, to the point that when listing the three great evil yokai, Ōtakemaru is sometimes replaced by Sutoku Tenno, who was a vengeful ghost. Imagine being the most powerful of the three great evils, and yet your story is barely remembered nowadays. Disgraceful! If you asked me why that is, I couldn't tell you for sure. It's downright impossible to ascertain why some stories remain popular while others fade into obscurity. We can make conjectures and talk about how the legend of Ōtakemaru is plain and doesn't offer much space for alternative interpretation of his character, whereas the legend of Shutendoji has the Oni calling the hero on his falsehood. All we want, but the final answer is still going to be accompanied by a shrug. History is, in many aspects, a guessing game, a puzzle with a million pieces, except we are not sure if all the pieces are supposed to go in. And it's also impossible to tell if we are missing some, because the original picture has been lost to time. We can never be sure if our reconstructions are accurate because, well, the times we are reconstructing are gone, already a part of history. And, speaking of history, Part 2. The history running its course in the background. The story of Nioh2 takes place during the Sengoku period. Much like the first game, it mixes real historical events with fiction, but this time, the fiction is slightly more anchored in existing Japanese mythology. Sengoku, or the Warring States period, was a rather turbulent era of Japanese history, usually dated from 1467 to 1603, when the Tokugawa shogunate gets established. It was a time of conflict and constant power struggles, which caused a lot of meaningless death and devastation. Though the official ruler of the land was still the emperor, and every lord and noble swore loyalty to him, the real power over the country was delegated to the shogun. The full title of the person holding this position was Sei Daishogun, which translates to Commander-in-Chief of the Expeditionary Force against the Barbarians. Wow, that's a mouthful. And their main task was simple: overseeing the military, and specifically the part of the military which fought the tribes of northern Japan. However, as the samurai class became more and more prominent, to the point of challenging the authority of the imperial court, the shogun became the de facto ruler of Japan, and the role of the emperor shifted to a more ceremonial one. I mean, everyone probably saw the writing on the wall when the emperor officially delegated the authority to collect taxes and enforce law to the shogun, which, where else would that lead than to the establishment of the shogunate? So the shogun was the one calling the shots, not only because he had the army at his disposal, while the emperor was chilling in his palace doing whatever he did. This arrangement worked fairly well, until it didn't. You see, the position of the shogun was hereditary, which was okay if the shogun in question was a strong leader who had ample time to train his successor. Which is to say, this system came crashing down in the 15th century, when Ashikaga Yoshimochi was choosing his successor. His son died of illness at the age of 19, so the new shogun had to be chosen among Yoshimochi's brothers. The method used for this was a lottery, of all things, to ensure fairness. Because fairness sure is the most important thing to consider when you're choosing the new military leader of Japan, right? It's not hard to predict that this did not end well. The shogun chosen, Ashikaga Yoshinori, was not trained for this role and ended up being a temperamental and despotic ruler who was heavily resented by almost everyone, which resulted in his eventual assassination. This, in turn, led to an instability of the shogunate system, because the next shogun, Yoshinori's son, who was hastily installed into the office after the assassination, died at only 10 years old, which led to his even younger brother, Yoshimasa, stepping into the position of the shogun. And while Yoshimasa tried to strengthen the power of the shogun to stabilize the country again, his associates didn't follow his instructions, which led to both social and political unrest. And on top of that, yet another succession crisis arose, and everything culminated into the Onion War, which is usually considered to be the beginning of the Sengoku era. This war not only decimated almost the entirety of Kyoto, the capital at the time, but also sparked violence, which spread across all of Japan, and from there it was only a matter of time before a full-blown civil war tore the whimpering remnants of the Ashikaga shogunate, named thus after the family the shoguns belonged to shreds. If we are to talk about the Warring States period, we need to also acknowledge the states bit, more specifically the daimyo. Usually simply translated as feudal lords, daimyo were local lords who owned significant amount of land. Their holdings were hereditary, but most importantly private, which meant that the state had no say in what happened in said holdings or with them. Some daimyo came from old noble families, others had military background, but all of them were fiercely protective of their lands, often hiring samurai to guard their properties and paying by renting the samurai a part of their land to live on. That's the feudal bit of feudal lord. The daimyo were supposed to obey the shogun, but as the power of the shogunate waned, the daimyo became more and more focused on expanding their holdings and grabbing power for themselves. The thing to keep in mind when it comes to the daimyo is that there were a lot of them, and promises of alliance would often turn into animosity in a blink of an eye. There was also a discrepancy between legal and effective control. It didn't matter if a daimyo legally owned a piece of land. If they couldn't support their claim by actual military force, said claim was completely useless. So, the Japan of Sengoku period was fragmented, perpetually on fire, just in case it's not obvious this is a hyperbole, and without any actual central ruling power. I mean, the emperor was technically still there, as was the shogun, but both had barely any power. It's hard to enforce the law when your own subordinates don't listen to you, after all. And since the daimyo had swords, their vassals had swords, well, it was easy to simply not listen to the authorities when you had the power of sword at your side. Applied military power was how problems were solved during the Sengoku era. Because there were so many people with swords running around, conflicts were commonplace. Be it short skirmishes or lengthy sieges, or even common people uprisings. For all the daimyo tried to bring prosperity to their holdings, often by gaining more land, ideally by engulfing the territories of their rivals with all their wealth, Japan at large was suffering, and issues kept piling up. It would be an oversimplification to look at the Sengoku era through a purely negative lens, because nothing in history is one-sided. People are not allergic to joy, even in the hardest of times. But it was chaotic and full of instability, which took a heavy toll on the population. And then a madman decided that enough is enough, and went on to try unifying Japan again. The name of this madman was Oda Nobunaga, whom history remembers as the first of the three great unifiers of Japan. Born the heir to Oda clan in the province of Owari, Nobunaga was mockingly called the Fool of Owari for his bewildering behavior during his teenage years especially, which included, but was not limited to, hatred of dressing formally, wrestling, watching sumo matches, visiting brothels, riding backwards on his horse, and dancing in taverns in women's clothing, allegedly. His later political ambitions didn't help matters whatsoever. The Oda clan was decently powerful on the local level, but pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things, just one daimyo among many. One of Nobunaga's first big achievements, if we set aside his rather turbulent ascent to the leadership of Oda clan, was taking control over the entirety of Owari province. He further proved his ability in the Battle of Okehazama in 1560, when he won against a much stronger army of a leader from a rival clan, Imagawa Yoshimoto. This victory showcased not only Nobunaga's competence, but also his willingness to play dirty and use every advantage possible. The following years brought with them many battles and many victories for the man once known as the Fool of Owari. Nobunaga proved to be not only a ruthless warlord, but also a crafty one. He was innovative, eager to incorporate new tactics and weapons, most notably matchlock muskets, into his army. He improved infrastructure, which was after all the fighting in shambles, and he also stabilized economy. His efforts helped to improve not only his life, but also the lives of the common folk. There's no need for us to go into detail and talk about every single thing Nobunaga did during his conquest. This video is not a comprehensive history lesson, and we will touch on some of the individual battles later during the analysis of Nioh2. An incident of note I will mention, though, was Nobunaga's siege of Mount Hiei in 1571, because it illustrates very pointedly why Nobunaga was also called the demon daimyo. On top of Mount Hiei stood a Buddhist temple, and the local monks were a threat to Nobunaga's rule because they supported his rivals and also because Mount Hiei was very close to Kyoto, so it was a potential danger not only to the city but also to Nobunaga's messengers and his communication network in general. So, in 1571, Nobunaga and his army set the mountain on fire and burned all the temples to the ground. Whoever didn't die in the flames was then killed by Nobunaga and his men. There were no exceptions, no mercy given. Civilians and monks alike lost their lives in one of the most brutal acts of violence in Japanese history up to that point. As you can see, history books remember Oda Nobunaga as a ruthless warlord, but it's hard to tell what he was actually like as a person. Stubborn, most likely, and charismatic, otherwise he wouldn't have achieved all he had. Many sources note his growing arrogance and short temper, but as with many others living in times as turbulent as Sengoku era, it's impossible to distinguish how much of that was his actual character and how much was simply the result of his circumstances. And I am going to stop myself here before I go on a tangent about how we should not apply concurrent morality standards onto historical figures. This video is already long as it is. Nobunaga was also described as not physically impressive, which may be why a lot of pop culture depictions of him are that of a slender pretty boy. Or a woman, looking at you, Fate franchise. On a completely unrelated note, collecting tea utensils became a political statement during Nobunaga's reign. Nobunaga's successful conquest came to a screeching halt with his death in 1582. Or at least that's what his enemies hoped would have happened, probably. Oda Nobunaga's end was brought on by one of his subordinates, Akechi Mitsuhide, who, for reasons unknown, decided to turn around his army, which was supposed to march to Bichu province to help with the siege of Kamatsu Castle, and assassinate Nobunaga, who was at the time in Kyoto with barely any forces. Mitsuhide did not tell his men who they were going to attack, and because such betrayal was completely unexpected, the would-be assassins managed to overcome Nobunaga, who was preparing for a tea ceremony in Honnoji Temple. While Nobunaga's loyal servants tried their best, they were quickly overwhelmed, and the temple was set ablaze, possibly by Nobunaga's command, for the warlord did not want to give his enemy a chance to claim his head. Nobunaga committed seppuku. Some sources claim he did so after helping the court ladies escape, like a proper gentleman. I'm sure Nobunaga's many enemies would have rejoiced when he died, if only Mitsuhide didn't fail to prove Nobunaga's death. The warlord's body was nowhere to be found after the attack on Honnoji Temple, and many doubted Mitsuhide's claims. So while Mitsuhide probably hoped to gain Nobunaga's power for himself, that would be the most likely reason for such betrayal, he was completely out of luck, because Oda Nobunaga's efforts and dreams to unite Japan, as well as a swift revenge for Nobunaga's death, were carried out by his loyal subordinate, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, who was fresh out of mercy. Originally a lawless servant, Hideyoshi soon proved to be a genius tactician and a skilled politician, and Oda Nobunaga placed a great deal of trust in him, even granting him the position of a daimyo. Hideyoshi was a cunning negotiator, often relying on his diplomatic skills more than the army at his disposal. In that regard, he stood in a contrast to Nobunaga's ruthlessness. Very little is known about Hideyoshi's life before his servitude under Nobunaga, which of course leaves ample space for speculation. Most of the historical sources that survive to this day focus on the parts he played in various battles and endeavors related to the unification of Japan. For a good reason, he practically finished the work Oda Nobunaga started. For all, Tokugawa Ieyasu is considered to be the one who finalized everything. That's mostly due to the fact that his was the dynasty that survived, whereas Hideyoshi's fell into ruin shortly after his death. In practice, Hideyoshi was the one to achieve Nobunaga's dream of unified Japan. This was in no small part thanks to Hideyoshi's strategical genius, but also due to his military power. After all, there were many who wanted to take the might of Nobunaga's forces for themselves, Tokugawa Ieyasu included. These two clashed several times before Ieyasu surrendered and gave his loyalty to Hideyoshi, probably deciding to wait for his turn, which did indeed come after Hideyoshi's death. It is said that during the last years of his life, Toyotomi Hideyoshi was extremely paranoid, as well as power-hungry, which, that seems to be a running theme with these warlords. I sure wonder why. I still remember one of my history books describing him as suffering from megalomania, which I found to be a hilarious choice of words back then, and I do so now as well. Despite this, he was not assassinated, but died a natural death, unlike his predecessor Nobunaga. Again, we will talk more about Hideyoshi in the context of the game. As mentioned before, the last of the three great unifiers of Japan is Tokugawa Ieyasu, who finished the job and established the Tokugawa shogunate. There's no need to talk in any detail about him, as he doesn't play that much of a role in Nioh2. So in a quick summary, he was an ally to Oda Nobunaga and did his part in all the fighting and conquering even after Nobunaga died and Hideyoshi rose to power. Despite his initial conflict with Hideyoshi, he ended up surrendering and working with him. And when later Hideyoshi exhausted a lot of his power during a frankly pointless war with Korea, Ieyasu was the one whose forces remained strong. I'm sure that came in handy when Hideyoshi died and Ieyasu jumped at the opportunity to seize power. His efforts culminating in the Battle of Sekigahara in the year 1600. There, Ieyasu stood in opposition to Ishida Mitsunari because, of course, there was an immediate civil war just 2 years after Hideyoshi's death in 1592. Did anyone expect these warlords to settle their power disputes peacefully? As history tells us, Tokugawa Ieyasu was the one to win the Battle of Sekigahara, and in 1603 he received the title of Shōgun from the emperor. Yeah, the emperor was still around. Remember him? The guy that was supposed to be in charge of the nation? And Ieyasu went on to establish the Tokugawa shogunate. With that, the Sengoku era ends and the next period, the Edo period, begins. But that's not important for this video. Going from this little history lesson back to Nioh2, we can see that the game has two plot threads which are eventually woven together. One which follows the historical events and another which brings the legend of Ōtakemaru into the mix. Part 3. The story of Nioh2. How does one modernize an old myth? There are several ways, depending on what exactly the end goal is. One of the most obvious ones is to give the characters more depth and nuance, which in this case would mean giving Ōtakemaru either a goal or a reason for all his destructive behavior. and giving Suzuka a bigger role than a simple pretty lady living in the mountains needing some help. Another possibility is switching the roles of good and bad around. You could make Ōtakemaru into a misunderstood figure and Suzuka into a malicious woman who benefited from being conventionally attractive. Or you could keep the original story structure but modernize the setting, making Suzuka into a famous actress being harassed by an obsessive fan and Muramaru into a policeman who is helping her. There's a plethora of possibilities when it comes to retelling a story that has already been told before. Let us now take a closer look at what exactly Nioh2 did with the legend of Ōtakemaru and what the results are. The game starts with a cutscene, a story told to us by an unknown woman. This story talks about how a long time ago, a man with two horns came into a village and how the villagers eventually begin to fear him. Tormented by fear and hatred, the man started attacking everyone, and so he was dubbed an Oni. Then, a lonely youth decided to make a stand against the Oni. By gathering glowing golden stones and forging them into a weapon, the youth was able to overcome the Oni. But just as the woman is about to finish the story, she is suddenly cut down by a mysterious figure in monk's robes. And then you are asked to make your character. And while you're playing around with all the sliders, you can hear the voices of your character's parents, talking and wondering how their child's gonna look like once they're born. Not a bad in-game explanation for a character creation. After you make the prettiest character the world has ever seen, or just choose to stick with the default, I'm not judging, you are then asked to customize your yōkai form. Because surprise surprise, you are not playing human this time around, but a half yōkai, which the English version of the game translates as shiftling. That's a good translation, all things considered, seeing as it puts emphasis on the fluid nature of your character and the ability to transform into something else, which many yōkai in many folktales possess. Definitely better than halfling or another cursed translation like that. Now, I bet you are all wondering what the initial cutscene was all about. It, of course, serves to bring some mystery to the player's character, as well as build intrigue. Who was the mysterious man, and why did he cut down your character's mother as well as your character? Well, it's at least implied he tried to do both these things, but seeing as you have a whole game to play, he clearly succeeded in only one. And because we know the game is going to feature Ōtakemaru at some point, it's not that hard to do the math and realize that the mysterious figure is the infamous Oni himself. But he is looking very, old and humanish, so that still raises a few questions, which will be answered later in the video. Once you make it through the character making screen, it's time for the first mission of the game. Well, after you choose your starting weapon and complete a small tutorial in a secluded location, which will be important later on. Nioh2 is structured the same way the first Nioh is. The story is broken into separate missions, which are specific levels, we can say, with a boss at the end. You can access these missions from a map, which shows you the region of Japan you are currently in, as well as serving the function of a main menu. That is to say, you can do other things than selecting missions on the map. For example, you can visit the blacksmith and make new weapons, you can browse the bestiary, where information about the yōkai you slay is recorded, or manage your sick tea utensil collection. Behold, art! The first mission, named the Village of Cursed Blossoms, is very simple, which is of course by design, as it's supposed to ease you into the game and its mechanics. That's not to say the mission is easy, this is still a Souls-like after all, and there are many ways to die. Curse you, gravity! But if you've played a Souls-like before and know to expect enemies above you, you'll do just fine. Based on the mission name, you may expect the first major boss to be some sort of flower yokai. But nope, the one who awaits you at the end of your first mission is Mezuki, yokai with the horse head. Mezuki and Gozuki, who you can meet in the same mission and who is responsible for many new player deaths, guard the gates to hell. So they are in a way rather fitting choice for the first boss of the game. And by that I mean they are both a sign of things to come. Welcome to this magical rendition of Sengoku era. It is pain and suffering as far as I can see. Also, the cursed blossoms in the name of the mission probably just reference the cherry blossoms in the temple courtyard where you fight Mezuki. After taking Mezuki down, your character in their yokai form enters a sort of berserk state, signified by their eyes turning red. As they slash around with their sword wildly, they are approached by a man who, with the help of a glowing gold crystal, Amrita, helps to calm them down. This man is Tokichiro, a humble merchant in search of Amrita, hoping to make profit and climb up the social hierarchy. He approaches the player's character in hopes of recruiting them. They would be the brawl to Tokichiro's brain of their little team of two. As your, up to this moment, nameless character accepts, they gain the name Hide. Tokichiro calls them such because they are carrying a dagger with this kanji etched into the blade. Said dagger also glows, but I'm sure that means absolutely nothing. Foreshadowing is a While Nioh2 serves mostly as a prequel to the first Nioh, we have to play by the rules established by the first game, which means the Amrita stones have to be involved somehow. For those of you who have stumbled into this video completely blind, hi by the way, hope you enjoy, Amrita are in the Nioh universe magic stones which can grant immense power, but not without a cost. Said cost is usually people turning into yokai and then losing their rational thought. And it's not healthy for yokai either to be around large quantities of Amrita. Amrita sprouts up whenever there is conflict, and if the Sengoku era had an abundance of something, it was conflict. Since the first mission takes place in the year 1555, and thus right before Oda Nobunaga started his unifying efforts, it's not that hard to guess the direction the game is about to go in. And lo and behold, as Tokichiro takes Hide to see a customer for the Amrita he gathered, said customer turns out to be Saito Dosan, known also as the Viper of Mino, who was Nobunaga's father-in-law. It is clear then that the first thread we are going to follow in the story of Nioh2 is the historical one. Most of the second mission is inconsequential and is there purely for gameplay purposes, aside from the final cutscene. There, Hide is attacked by a masked figure, but the fight is soon broken up by Tokichiro, who suggests a talk to straighten things out. A compromise is reached, but the masked figure, a woman named Mumio as we learn later, leaves, much to Tokichiro's chagrin. The peddler was hoping to gain another ally, but alas, Mumio only cares for slaying yokai and little else, at least at this very moment. The third main mission, called the Viper's Sanctum, continues Tokichiro's attempts to get into Dosan's good graces, only there is a little snag in the plan. Dosan got attacked by his son and successor Yoshitatsu, and is currently hiding in his estate. Tokichiro decides that he and Hide ought to help, since Dosan is an important benefactor. And so onwards you go, to save a damsel, a competent samurai, in distress. This mission is of deep story importance. Dosan reveals that he was once a member of Sohaya, a clan of yokai hunters, but met a yokai woman one day with whom he fell in love. He smashed the yokai slaying sword, a shard of which was fashioned into the dagger Hide wields, and left his hunter past behind. Dosan made a promise to the yokai woman, Hide's mother, that he would gather Amrita in order to prevent the stones from being used for evil. That's where his interest in Tokichiro offer stems from. Though it's not outright stated, Dosan is Hide's father. He realizes this at the end of the third mission and then sacrifices himself so that Hide can escape from the overrun estate. As Hide and Tokichiro are fleeing, they are joined by Mumio, who reluctantly decided to return. At this stage, the game has offered us first few puzzle pieces for the initial mystery of the death of Hide's mother. If Hide's father was Saito Do-san, a powerful man, then clearly either someone managed to sneak upon his wife undetected, which would be no small feat, or Do-san wasn't in the picture any longer, which then begs a series of other questions. Chief of them, why? No need to worry though, the game won't keep us in suspense for too long. But there is still some patience required, because it's time to move on to Owari province to meet none other than Oda Nobunaga, a person who, by Tokichiro's words, was recommended by Saito Do-san. So Tokichiro and Hide go to see what's going on in Owari, whilst also kinda hoping to blend into Nobunaga's forces to lose any potential pursuers from Yoshitatsu, who seems to be keen on taking out everyone in his way. Nobunaga's introduction is nothing short of perfect. He meets Tokichiro and Hide in the yard, dressed informally and training with a musket. He doesn't seem to be that interested in Tokichiro's offer of Amrita, but he finds Hide interesting and decides to allow them to serve under him. We also see Do-san's daughter and Nobunaga's wife, Nohime, who is a boss in the first Nioh, by the way. If you know, you know. We also get to see that Hide has no idea how to properly act in the presence of a lord, implying they have little or none formal training. Which for one is entertaining, yes, but in the context of what we know up to this point, implies that Hide had not been brought up as a child of a lord, and was most likely raised just by their mother, who didn't teach them any courtly manners in the short while they had together. Yet another piece of the puzzle to ponder. And, speaking of Hide is a silent protagonist in the literal sense. They cannot speak. It is likely that they suffered an injury to the throat in the initial cutscene of the game, which resulted in their muteness. Not that it stops them from being expressive in body language and face. They are a skilled fighter, capable of slaying men and yōkai alike, but there seems to be very little bloodthirst in Hide. They usually only strike when provoked, or in defense of their allies. They are their own character, despite the fact that you customize their appearance, and you are witnessing their story. If anybody pitched Nioh2 as an RPG to you, and I have seen it being referred to as such, they were wrong. The only role-playing you can do in the game is choosing whether you smack your enemies with an axe or a spear, or magic. Actually, on Nioh is... The next story mission is called The Hidden Monsters of Okahazama, and it's there that Nioh2 starts fully weaving history and fiction together. As you may remember from our brief history lesson, the Battle of Okahazama was a pivotal moment in Oda Nobunaga's career. In real-life history, Nobunaga stood against the much bigger forces of Imagawa Yoshimoto. The same thing happens in game too, only the enemy army has actual monsters in it. The battle took place on a rainy night. The weather was one of the key factors in Nobunaga's victory, and the game reflects that. It's one of those missions where the deadliest of all enemies is gravity. At least that was in my case. I swear, bats are the worst. The finale of the mission sees Hide going against Imagawa Yoshimoto himself, whose guardian spirit is an elephant, which is an interesting choice. Right, that's something I haven't talked about yet. Guardian spirits are beings in the shape of animals and mythical beasts, which are not only tied to a gameplay mechanic, but also incorporated into the story. Key characters all have one, or two in rare cases, spirits that watch over them and whose power they can utilize in combat. The spirit always reflects the character's personality in some way, and there is often an obvious visual connection. Hide can use multiple spirits in battle, and they don't appear to have one of their own, but most importantly, they can see the spirits and interact with them, which is a rare talent, as the spirits are invisible to the naked eye. Anyway, back to the story. Hide defeats Yoshimoto and everybody claps, not literally. We are then treated to a cutscene where Tokichiro flounders upon seeing Nobunaga's sister Oichi. But more importantly, Hide cuddles a spirit in the shape of a cat. They snatch it from where it is blocking Nobunaga's path, which is funny in the context that none aside Hide and possibly Nobunaga can see the cat, so it just looks like Hide is cradling empty air in their hands. The following mission, titled The Mysterious One-Night Castle, sees Hide and Tokichiro dealing with the conundrum of building a castle to establish influence over the northern part of Mino province without bringing the ire of Yoshitatsu, that's Saito Dosan's son, remember, upon their heads. Tokichiro's plan is to steal a castle instead of building one, with the help of a shiftling named Koroku. Basically, Tokichiro went to ask the local yōkai to help him kick the invading samurai forces out. Not a bad idea, all things considered, but unsurprisingly, things go awry straight away. Koroku admits that his kind got on well with the local humans, but then the samurai came and chased everyone away, and well, some of the yōkai went a little berserk in the process. Also, a portion of the samurai army wasn't quite human anymore. Which, yeah, that isn't worrisome at all. But hey, if we deal with enemies and the berserk yokai in the form of giant weasel with sides on its legs, the castle is ours to keep. Piece of cake, right? But everything turns out well, and once Tokichiro does his calming Amrita trick on the subdued Kamaitachi, the conflict's over, and Koroku and his Kappa squad help with the repairs and fortifications of the castle/fort. And so, Nobunaga's conquest can continue. This mission not only references a legend about Toyotomi Hideyoshi, in which he built a fort in one night, but also brings forth the idea that not all yokai are evil. It isn't just Hide and their yokai mother who are different. There are groups of yokai, such as Koroku and his gang, who are completely fine with living near humans, or even among them. The story then continues along the lines drawn by actual history. It's time to take over the Inabayama castle and defeat Saito Yoshitatsu. But it's not going to be that easy, since in-game Yoshitatsu has yokai in his army, as well as shitton of Amrita stones he stole from Dosan. Tokichiro mentions that he heard about a man who took over the castle in a single night and decides to pay this man a visit. This mysterious man turns out to be none other than Takenaka Shigeharu, also known as Hanbei, who was originally a servant under the Saito clan, but let's say he wasn't too happy with the way things were going. In-game Hanbei is a young but sickly man. Look at this peak historical accuracy! Who initially apologizes for his inability to help due to his condition. But Tokichiro then does his weird Amrita healing trick, and that makes Hanbei feel much better. We finally have a visual explanation of how this strange healing works. Hanbei's guardian spirit is covered in weird purple miasma when Hide and Tokichiro arrive. And after Tokichiro uses the Amrita stone to either scatter or absorb the miasma, Hanbei stops coughing and his spirit too looks much better. A connection between spirits and Amrita was implied before. In the first Nioh, the antagonist was using William's, the protagonist's, spirit as a compass to point him to the location of Amrita. And the clue is also in the name. Amrita is called spirit stones by Japanese locals, but this cutscene serves as a visual confirmation. Hanbei then shows that he can see spirits, or at least his own, when he comments on said spirit taking interest in Hide, and agrees to help the cause and show us the secrets of Inabayama Castle. The castle is, as the name suggests, built atop a mountain, and so the plan is to make use of various tunnels underneath the castle to pass unnoticed by the forces above. This plan goes surprisingly well. Though the tunnels are of course full of yokai, which is not a good sign, there also appears to be Amrita crystals growing everywhere, which is also not a good sign. The view is nice though. Ascending to the very top of the castle rewards us with a confrontation with Yoshitatsu. One of the things you notice right away, aside from the fact Yoshitatsu tries to murder Hide as soon as they step into the room, is that he has two glowing purple horns protruding from his forehead. Also his eyes are red. Also he has two spirits with him, which he switches between during the fight. Also, he has yokai shifts. 3 of them, same as Hide. Hope you are ready to fight your evil twin, and I don't even mean that as a joke. No, like, this is Hide's actual twin. You get the reveal after the boss fight in a dramatic cutscene before Ōtakemaru in his mysterious stranger getup bursts from Yoshitatsu's body, killing him in the process. Because Yoshitatsu's sudden interest in Amrita wasn't out of nowhere, Ōtakemaru was possessing him, using him for his own schemes, which are yet unknown. Of course, Hide doesn't know this mysterious figure is Ōtakemaru, they only know him as the reason their mother died, but as they grasp their Amrita dagger, which glows slightly, indicating the figure in front of them is a yokai, Ōtakemaru vanishes into thin air. Mumio then walks into the room, confirming the battle outside is over, but her amulet starts to glow, same as Hide's dagger. Mumio's amulet is a part of the yokai slaying sword Dosan shattered, and both pieces react to each other as well as the lingering presence of yokai in the room. Both characters don't have time to ponder this turn of events, however, as Tokichiro bursts into the room, visibly distressed that the Amrita which was supposed to be here is gone. Despite the hiccups, Nobunaga's victory is assured, and it's time to move westward onto the next province. I don't have to point out that this story mission is a crucial point in the narrative. It's there that Ōtakemaru makes his presence known again, reminding the player that this game isn't just a recap of historical events with few yokai thrown in for some additional action. No, there are things brewing in the background, hidden by the endless war and violence. Ōtakemaru also shows us that he can straight up possess people, which is a worrisome development, because if he puppeteered Yoshitatsu around, who's to say he won't do the same thing again with someone else? Then there's the hint at the shattered yokai slaying sword being important in the future, even if it's in pieces at the moment, and Tokichiro's growing interest in the Amrita stones. Also the whole twin thing, that requires some additional context, methinks. In Japanese culture, historically speaking at least, twins were considered to be a bad omen. In some places, twins were believed to be one soul split into 2 bodies, which was an unnatural state of being and was therefore dangerous. Or that a yokai got involved and replicated the real baby and was in the process of trying to take its place. The first belief seems to be a more modern one, but sources about this topic are scarce, so I honestly can't be sure. Whilst the second belief relates to the supposed existence of onigo, oni children. Babies born deformed or with teeth or anything else considered strange were assumed to be oni in the making and were thus killed, abandoned, or in the best case scenario, given to a temple to become monks. With that in mind, it's not that hard to believe that twin births were often concealed if one of the children wasn't outright killed. Also, more children means greater risk during the birth, as well as higher risk of stillbirth or infant death, or even more mouths to feed, so people of medieval Japan went to great lengths to assure that there was only one offspring. This included avoiding specific food, for example, such as nuts or eggs with 2 yolks. With this additional context, we can easily see what happened with Hide and their twin, to avoid the ire of others, because there was always the risk your neighbor won't leave things to fate and will take care of the Oni child himself. The twin birth was concealed. Dosan took one child and Hide's mother the other, and they were raised apart, not knowing about each other's existence. This additional information also confirms our previous assumption about Hide. They don't know any courtly manners because they weren't taught any, despite being a child of an important lord. Now, you may have noticed that there is a certain important historical figure that should have been there already but hasn't yet popped up, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The next story chapter answers why that's the case, and I admit I was caught off guard when first playing Nioh2, even though in retrospect all the clues were there. Following his victory at Inabayama, Nobunaga hosts a celebration, during which not only he proclaims his desire to unify Japan, but also decides to reward Tokichiro and Hide for their services and loyalty. Cue Hide's confusion at socially acceptable behavior. Well, it's more like Tokichiro asks to be bestowed with a new name, and Nobunaga agrees. By mixing elements from Hide's and Tokichiro's names, Nobunaga proclaims them to be Hideyoshi. Two people, one name. Tokichiro initially asks for the name to be Yoshihide, but Nobunaga vetoes that and changes it to Hideyoshi. Then he adds that both Hide and Tokichiro remind him of Nioh guardians, as the camera shows two offset guardians in statue form behind him, just in case you didn't get the hint. That's an elegant way of interweaving Hide's existence into the history of Nioh2, and the fine explanation of Hideyoshi's at moments magical ability to be both martially and politically extraordinary skilled. Easy to be both if you are actually two separate people with two separate skill sets, huh? Also, to elaborate on Nobunaga's comment about the Nioh guardians. They guard Buddhist temples against evil spirits, but also against human robbers. The name is most often translated as two benevolent kings, though I have seen the variant two Deva kings. They always come in pairs, similar to Komainu, and one of them has open mouth while the other has it closed. To explain the significance of them and why the game is named after them, we have to take a small sidestep into Buddhism. First off, Devas. At the risk of oversimplification, but in an attempt to make this as easy as possible, let's consider them to be deities from Indian mythology. They can be found in both Hindu and Buddhist traditions, though their roles are different. In Buddhism, Devas represent a possible path of reincarnation. They are more powerful and happier than humans, but not yet free from the cycle of reincarnation. While Devas, alternatively also called Suras, aren't 100% the goodest boys, because it's mainly Abrahamic faiths that deal with moral absolutes, they are for the most part benevolent, unlike their more demonic counterparts, the Asuras. Now what's that all to do with Nioh guardians, you ask? Nioh are protectors of Buddha and his teachings. They are wrathful or fierce devas who use their immense might to destroy those who would threaten whichever Buddha they are tasked to protect, or Buddhist truths in general. A Buddha, as someone who has broken free from all suffering, cannot inflict harm onto others, and so the fierce deities are there to assist with force if necessary. In some traditions, Nioh guardians are wrathful manifestation of bodhisattvas, more specifically of Vajrapani, who is often considered to be the bodhisattva which represents Buddha's power. Bodhisattva is someone striving towards Buddhahood who is capable of reaching enlightenment in their current reincarnation, but they purposefully defy this so they can remain in samsara and help others reach enlightenment. I promise there is no more Buddhist stuff after this, so just hanging there, okay? So now we know why the Nioh statues guard Buddhist temples, but why is the game named after them? My best guess is this. Remember how one of the statues traditionally has open mouth while the other has it closed? Well, they are pronouncing the first and the last grapheme, respectively, of Devanagari, aka the Sanskrit alphabet. If we put those characters together, they symbolize the birth and death of all things. They can also represent inhalation and exhalation. And hey, that kinda tracks for a Souls-like, huh? Nioh, this kanji, is also a homonym for Nioh, this kanji, which means simply two kings. And that is also kind of on point for Nioh2. By comparing Hide and Tokichiro to Nioh guardians, Nobunaga is describing them as strong and fierce, yes, but also as a strictly protective force. He is also firmly establishing hierarchy. Hideyoshi is not to be his rival, but a pair of guardians, bound to keep his dream of unity safe. After this little celebration, it's time to once again make history. The following story missions focus on important battles in Nobunaga's campaign, with a little sprinkle of Hide's personal issues, such as the confirmation that Hide's dagger and Mumio's amulet are parts of the yokai slaying blade, and that there may be a way to reform the blade again. Important historical figures show up, including Tokugawa Ieyasu, victories are secured, and yokai are slain. We are also shown that Nobunaga has incorporated muskets into his army, and that they are a bit more effective against the yokai than bows are, and that some of the opposing daimyo have started to turn into monsters, presumably due to excessive use of Amrita. Gameplay-wise, this mean fun boss fights. Story-wise, this is extremely worrying. What did I just say? So, it seems Ōtakemaru has been possessing Otto Daimyo in order to amass Amrita, and he can also just rip time and space apart. Great. We are also shown that he has a spirit with him, a Baku. But its color seems muddy, almost as if it's sick. It is also confirmed that the glowy red eyes on a yokai/person mean Ōtakemaru is somehow involved. With Ōtakemaru's second appearance serving as a catalyst, things start to escalate. The next story mission takes place in Osaka, where the historical Hideyoshi famously built his castle, and Nioh2 follows suit, though we first have to get rid of some yokai, of course. And while Hide carries on as they did before, fighting and having no clue how to act in a formal setting, Tokichiro is shown floundering, battling doubt and possibly also paranoia, or the beginnings of. And that makes him vulnerable. At the very end of the Pervading Waters mission, after you get munched on by Gyuki, you are shown a cutscene of Tokichiro sitting down, talking with another lord, who is being followed by the sickly-looking Baku, and has glowing red eyes. Tokichiro voices his concern about using underhanded tactics, but the other lord scolds him, saying that he has granted Tokichiro powers to realize his destiny and that he should rid himself of pity. After which the sickly Baku appears on Tokichiro's side. Uh-oh. Also Hanbei dies, but that was inevitable because once again we are following real historical events. Not only is this a visual representation of Ōtakemaru starting to dig his claws into Tokichiro, but making the spirit associated with Ōtakemaru a Baku is clever on a symbolic level too. Baku is a yokai in the shape of a tapir, which eats dreams, especially the bad ones. Normally, it is considered to be a force of good, a protector of mankind that often acts as a guardian spirit. Yokai and evil flees whenever a Baku is near, and they are also believed to be bringers of good luck. However, since Baku eats nightmares, if it ever gets too hungry, it can start eating hopes and ambitions too, leaving the affected person hollow. And this seems to be what Ōtakemaru is doing, letting his Baku spirit eat away at his victim's hopes, leaving behind an empty shell for Ōtakemaru to fill with his own desires. Yikes. We still don't know why is Ōtakemaru doing all this, however. He's clearly amassing Amrita, but to what end? Well, answers to this question will have to wait, since the next story mission takes place in Honnoji Temple, and that means Oda Nobunaga is about to die. And while in real life we do not know the reason why Akechi Mitsuhide betrayed and killed Nobunaga, Nioh2 variant of the story clearly puts the blame on Ōtakemaru, who, based on the glowing red eyes Mitsuhide's subordinate Saito Toshimitsu is sporting, is puppeteering Mitsuhide around, at least partially. Mitsuhide also seems to view the Amrita Nobunaga got his hands on after defeating his enemies as an issue, something that should be destroyed, so all of the pointless violence would cease. If only there wasn't anyone trying to profit on that violence, am I right? The entire temple, when Hide gets to it, is on fire. Nobunaga ordered Yasuke to make sure no enemy can get their hands on his remains, because damned be the demon daimyo if he allows his enemies the satisfaction. We do get a very cute scene of Nobunaga and his wife fighting and dying together, however. Very romantic. Almost makes up for the Yukiona boss fight from Nioh 1. Almost. As history dictates, any help for Nobunaga arrives far too late, and so the only thing Hide can do is confront Mitsuhide, who is unfortunately long gone. The only one Hide finds is the possessed Toshimitsu, who nopes it out of the burning temple and leaves us to fight Akasha, just in case we weren't tired of flaming wheels already. The final cutscene shows Oichi mourning her brother, Nobunaga. She tells Hide she has been given an Amrita stone by Tokichiro and that he said it will grant her a wish. Hide is visibly disturbed by this, but thankfully Oichi is suspicious of the stone and sets it aside. Yet another subtle hint that Tokichiro is sinking deeper into the stones and Ōtakemaru's thrall. The next story mission sees Hide following after Mitsuhide with an army under Tokichiro's command in tow. Said army also now includes people turned into yōkai via the power of Amrita, which, yeah, that's bad. When we catch up with Mitsuhide and his subordinate Toshimitsu, it's clear that Ōtakemaru's power proves too much for the poor man to bear, and he transforms into Ryomen Sukuna with glowing purple horns, indicating Ōtakemaru's influence, and starts mindlessly slaughtering everyone. Mitsuhide manages to flee just as Hide arrives, and a fight ensues. The two-faced spectre is no slouch, but neither are we. When the yokai is slain, Ōtakemaru appears but only for a small moment, before vanishing again, leaving behind confused Toshimitsu, who then immediately gets stabbed by Tokichiro. It's a bad sign that Tokichiro is now killing people in cold blood, and Hide does not like what his friend is doing at all, so they leave. Tokichiro appears to be sad to see them go, but does not follow, and so Hide catches up to Mitsuhide alone. Mitsuhide puts up no fight, but Hide decides to spare him, recognizing that he has been at least partially manipulated by Ōtakemaru, and also not wanting to be what Tokichiro is slowly becoming, a merciless murderer. In the end, Hide and Mumio, who has followed him, join Mitsuhide and all of them leave to find Tokugawa Ieyasu. And so we are about to witness Hideyoshi/Tokichiro in his most paranoid era. When Hide makes it to the lands overseen by Tokugawa, they are met by Hattori Hanzo, a ninja who serves the Tokugawa clan. His spirit, Nekomata, tells us a bit more about the nature of spirits and yokai, that some are born out of goodwill, while others from fear and hatred. The game visually differentiates between them by color. Blue eyes for the good spirits and yokai, and red eyes for the bad ones, also referred to in the English translation as fiends. To be clear, the main difference between yokai and spirits in the context of Nioh is purely mechanical. Spirits being the more domesticated ones who look after humans and whose power humans can use, while yokai live in the wild as their own beings. That's not a perfect metaphor, but hopefully you get the gist of it. As we have seen in the story mission that introduced Koroku, good yokai can go berserk due to fear and Amrita, but the opposite should also be true, if nearly impossible to achieve. Allying with Tokugawa sets Hide firmly in opposition to Tokichiro, who seems to be getting more and more careless with the lives of men under his command, as well as the lives of his opponents. Gone is the cheerful merchant that befriended Hide. In his place stands a ruthless warlord seeking power and glory. And Amrita, of course. The only one who can stop him now is Hide, however much they loathe the idea of aiming their sword at their friend. Any hope for possible reconciliation proves to be in vain. Though Tokichiro, when Hide confronts him at the end of mission called Two Faces of Hospitality, does his best to try and sway Hide to his side by offering them land, titles, and Amrita. When it's obvious that Hide cannot be bought and will not turn blind eye to Tokichiro's rampage, the two of them fight. Hide does not want to kill their friend, but they are forced to in the end, because Tokichiro's desire for Amrita now runs deeper than their friendship, and they leave the battle arena visibly sad. That should have been the end of things, but unfortunately for everyone, Ōtakemaru is involved, and Hide just unknowingly presented him a perfect opportunity. Freshly killed body and a shit ton of Amrita. 3 guesses as to what happens next. If you guess the sky turns red, every yokai in the vicinity goes berserk, and also the castle comes to life, you'd be correct. And since Ōtakemaru waited until Hide was a reasonable distance away, they now have to make their way back to the castle again, while said castle hurls rocks at them. Excellent soundtrack though. After several rounds of the deadliest game of dodgeball in existence, you make it to the boss arena, where you first have to deal with the living castle, which is more of a stone giant with the castle on top of its head, which makes sense since Daidarabochi are a type of giant in Japanese folklore, before Tokichiro appears. Only it is no longer Tokichiro, but his corpse puppeteered around by Ōtakemaru, as indicated by the 2 purple horns and glowy red eyes. He simply states that he no longer has any need of Hide before using Amrita to weaken them and then stabbing them with their own dagger. And so ends Hide, skilled fighter who was sadly no match for Ōtakemaru and a shit ton of Amrita. Just kidding, obviously there is a lot of game left to play, so Hide can't be full on dead. Well, they are and they aren't. After the cutscene ends, Hide wakes up in the place from the tutorial, but this time they are not here alone. Hanbei waits for them there, as does their mother. This place is called the Interim in the English translation and lies between the realm of the living and the realm of the dead. Souls of those who left behind unfinished business gather here, as well as yokai seeking safety. The Interim is a real place, but few can access it freely, seeing as it is a realm of in-between. Hide can enter and leave either by the virtue of their bloodline or thanks to the dagger they have, or maybe thanks to both. Speaking of bloodlines, Hide's mother is none other than Suzuka Gozen herself, who in this version of the story is Ōtakemaru's sister. We will talk about her and her relationship with Ōtakemaru a bit later on. At this moment in the game, she serves mostly to give exposition. She explains to Hide that the reason why Tokichiro changed so much is because he got possessed by Ōtakemaru. This is the first time the game name drops him, and that it's up to Hide to stop him. And that Hide has been dead for a while, and in the meantime Tokichiro united the rest of Japan and rules mercilessly over human and yokai alike. Suzuka also explains that Ōtakemaru was the driving force behind much of the conflict and strife Japan found itself in, all in the hopes of gaining back his former might through Amrita. The only one capable of stopping him is Hide, if they manage to restore the power of the yokai-slaying blade Sohayamaru. And for that, a trip to Byodo Inn, a Buddhist temple located near the capital, is necessary, since that is where Ōtakemaru's remains were originally sealed. The Mausoleum of Evil, as the story mission is called, is one of my favorites, because the map has a fun mechanic in it. You drain water from the ponds around the temple to reveal another temple underneath, upside down. I definitely didn't expect that when I first played through Nioh2, but it's such a fun idea, though I'm sure there are people who absolutely loathed this level. But back to the story. Once you make it all the way down to the very bottom, you are rewarded with an audience with Princess Goldilocks. You get to fight Shutendoji. Because you make it to the innermost chamber just as Ōtakemaru is releasing his fellow 2 great evils, Shutendoji and Tamamo no Mae. And while Tamamo nopes it out of there to be a menace in Nioh 1's DLC, Shutendoji remains to fight Hide. And you must forgive me for misspeaking the Oni's name previously. It is quite an easy mistake to make. Just look at those luscious locks. After besting Shutendoji in close combat or letting him drunkenly stumble around, both tactics are valid, Mumio arrives and she and Hide realize they need both parts of the broken blade, her necklace and Hide's dagger, as well as some Amrita to reform Sohayamaru and then hopefully get rid of Ōtakemaru. And since Tokichiro/Ōtakemaru is sitting on a heap of Amrita, it's time to pay him a little visit. The mission in which we do so is called the Golden Castle, and the name references Jurakudai, a palace that Hideyoshi built in Kyoto, the capital city at the time. In-game Jurakudai is said to glitter like gold, which indicates that Hideyoshi used Amrita for its construction. And you know what that means. Say hello to Lady Osakabe! It's time for a Fight vs Living Castle Part 2 Electric Boogaloo. This time, it's an actual castle, not a giant with a castle for a head. Successfully defeating the Lady Castle means there is now enough Amrita for Hide to reforge Sohayamaru, and they do so without delay. But since Tokichiro left the fighting to his bride, we once again have to catch up with him. And it just so happens that when we do, cherry blossoms have bloomed. How romantic. Anyway, time to commit regicide. Of course, Ōtakemaru doesn't go down without a fight, though he still doesn't seem to be at full strength, since he does the fighting through Tokichiro's body. And when Hide uses Sohayamaru to cut off Ōtakemaru's horns, there is a small moment where Tokichiro seems to remember himself, and he and Hide share one last memory together, before Tokichiro leaves the mortal plane with a smile on his face. His soul finally free from Ōtakemaru's clutches. The Oni doesn't give up that easily, however. You have to fight him in his old monk form twice, because he's too stubborn to die in one hit, and also remember the legend, Tamuramaru had to kill him twice. But Hide does eventually best him, draining all the Amrita-induced power out of him, until only a piece of his horn is left behind. With a final goodbye to Suzuka, Hide returns to Byodo Inn to seal Ōtakemaru once more, using their own body and the power of Sohayamaru. Thus they fall into a death-like sleep, and sleep for so long that the entirety of Nioh 1 manages to happen. Because surprise surprise, this is not the end of the game, even though everything may seem like it is. Because, as you remember, Ōtakemaru is an Oni, and what we fought was a withered monk that wasn't even called Ōtakemaru, so there has to be at least one more boss fight left in store for us. And oh boy, is there a boss fight! Hide is woken from their eternal nap by William, the protagonist of Nioh 1, doing what he does best, poking his head where it doesn't belong and getting caught in the resulting chaos. Hide is not happy to be woken in this manner, and they and William clash, before Hide regains their senses. And by that I mean the specter of Ōtakemaru escapes their body and vanishes. Oops. Also yes, Nioh 2 is a prequel and a sequel simultaneously. Thank you for asking. We learn that William is chasing Maria and has woken up Hide and therefore released Ōtakemaru by an accident. William suspects Maria to be up to no good, and since the best way to find Ōtakemaru is to find whoever is stirring the most trouble at any given moment, Hide and Mumio join forces with him. As the trio gets closer and closer to Maria's lair, it is revealed that she intends to use Hideyoshi to further her goals, whatever those are. Based on her actions in the first Nioh DLCs, it's probably something to do with gathering Amrita. There's a slight issue with that though. Hideyoshi are two separate people, and Tokichiro also wasn't as evil as Ōtakemaru's later influence made him out to be. So let's say Maria's plan is very much doomed to fail. But also poor Tokichiro. He just can't rest in peace, can he? People just insist on dragging him back to life, huh? So Maria does her thing, infusing Tokichiro with Amrita, but wouldn't you know it, Ōtakemaru appears and is very pleased with her work, since she just offered him a perfect vessel on a silver platter. And this is why we don't delve into necromancy, kids. We never know if the dead warlord hasn't been possessed by a vicious demon. Thankfully, Hide, William, and Mumio arrive just before Ōtakemaru manages to repossess Tokichiro, and Hide once again uses their own body to stop Ōtakemaru. This time, however, they are not inside Byodo Inn, and so Hide has to overcome Ōtakemaru's influence on their own. This is presented as a battle inside Hide's mind, in which we battle Ōtakemaru in his true form of an Oni with 3 magical swords. Beating him is incredibly satisfying, and as he falls, he comments on Hide's eyes, seemingly finally making the connection to Suzuka, and expresses longing to see his sister again, which, sir, you were the one to kill her. But there is more to Ōtakemaru than pure evilness, as one of Nioh2's DLCs tells us. For now though, the victory is won, and the day is saved, and Maria's plan is destroyed by the simple fact that she was wrong in her assumptions. If I had a nickel for every time a Nioh villain resurrected a Sengoku warlord to brutalize and murder people, only to be completely wrong in their assessment of said warlord and their willingness to join the villain's evil plan, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't much, but it's weird that it happened twice. There is a scene which parallels the start of the game, where after defeating Ōtakemaru in their mind, Hide awakens to see Tokichiro standing above them, holding an Amrita crystal to calm them down. What follows is an incredibly sweet moment as Hide, Tokichiro and Mumio reconcile, while Maria, confused as to why Tokichiro isn't immediately up to commit war crimes, gets detained by William, who comments on her being just plain wrong in her assessment. The final cutscene of the game shows us William returning to Hanzo and the son they are racing together, confirming them to be the OTP of the first game, Tokichiro finally leaving to the afterlife and hopefully getting to stay there in peace, and Mumio and Hide going together on a journey to presumably hunt and help yōkai. I have to say I love the ending of Nioh2. I am so weak for found family narratives, and the fact that the writers allowed Hide to give one last goodbye to their friend Tokichiro as he was at the start and not the corrupted version just about melted my heart. I also think that it was very fitting to have the final fight against Ōtakemaru happen not on the physical level, but inside Hide's mind, considering Ōtakemaru's main thing throughout the entire game was possessing people. This way we got to end him and only him, not some poor unfortunate guy he took on as a vassal. Part 4. The Villain. We have looked at the story of Nioh2 in its entirety, and now it's time to zoom on the bits which involve Ōtakemaru specifically. We only ever see him as a spectre, a man in monk's robe with the hat and shakujo, with grey withered skin and red eyes with 3 circles in them. It is possible that the 3 circles represent his 3 swords, which in turn correspond to the 3 types of spirits, and therefore the 3 different forms Hide's shift can have. Why is he wearing a monk-like apparel is anybody's guess. Honestly, the main reason he reads as a Buddhist monk is the shakujo, so it could be just a stylistic choice. Or the influence of Byodo Inn, which is a Buddhist temple, on this particular wisp of Ōtakemaru that escaped. Or it could even be referencing the legend of Shuten Doji, where Minamoto no Raiko went to the Oni's fortress disguised as a monk, and gained entrance by pretending to be something he wasn't. So maybe Ōtakemaru's monk's getup is supposed to evoke the same feeling of pretense and falsehood. Or it may simply be the juxtaposition of monk as someone who is good, but in this case the monk-like figure is out there committing war crimes. Or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. Anyway, Ōtakemaru's appearance is overall haggard and ragged, which is a good visual indication of his current status. He is a wraith, with only a sliver of his former strength, compelled forward by his hatred and rage. The grays in his color palette make him seem washed out and put further emphasis on him being lesser than he was before, and this feeling is amplified by his humanoid appearance. Ōtakemaru considers humans to be weak and pitiful, and for his spirit to take on this particular form, well, to say the former kijin is displeased to be diminished in such a way is an understatement. But unfortunately for everyone, Ōtakemaru possesses not only brute strength, but also cunning mind and magical powers, and is not to be taken lightly even when weakened. And so he makes use of his ghostly form and throws Japan into chaos and war, and then keeps the strife going, because conflict grows Amrita, and Amrita can be turned into strength. If you recall the original legend, Ōtakemaru spent some time after his death by Tamuramaru's hand slowly gathering strength to regain a physical form once more, and it is this part of the story Nioh2 makes use of. Nobody ever specified how exactly Ōtakemaru regained his might after all. Of course, in the original legend, Ōtakemaru returns pretty quickly since Tamuramaru is the one to battle him both times. However, there's no reason why his return to power can't be delayed so that it takes several human lifetimes. We don't know how fast Amrita forms, as the games have never addressed that, and since that is what Ōtakemaru is using to power back up, it stands to reason he is limited by how fast he can generate Amrita. So if we assume Ōtakemaru lived and was slain during the Heian period, and then spent time gathering himself back till he regained enough power to start influencing people and events directly, before coming back to rule over Japan once again, only this time through the possessed Hideyoshi, then that corresponds with the original legend surprisingly well, though it's slightly stretched. Also, Ōtakemaru is not slain by the same hero both times. Or is he? There is a reason why Tamuramaru never gets mentioned in Nioh2, but more on that in a bit. In one of the possible conversations with her in the interim, Suzuka alludes to Ōtakemaru being the reason for the Warring States era coming to be. Which, if we remember the history lesson from chapter 2 of the video, and if we consider the possibility of him puppeteering and possessing people long before he did it to Yoshitatsu, isn't completely implausible within the logic of the game. An assassination here, an ambitious lord manipulated into a few betrayals there, and bam, the shogunate has crumbled and the land has been plunged into chaos. Chaos that is generating Amrita and thus giving Ōtakemaru more strength in turn. The more people fight and die, the better, not only because it means more Amrita, but because it also means less humans. Truly, Ōtakemaru is an evil incarnate, well deserving of his position as one of the three great evil yōkai. But is that all there is to Ōtakemaru? As I said before, a common way to go about retelling a story is to add depth and layers to its characters, examine their reasoning and deeds more closely, perhaps even offer sympathy to the villain. And this is indeed the road Nioh2 takes. In the third DLC, called The First Samurai, Hide travels to the past, to the time Ōtakemaru was still alive, and learns a bit more about their bloodthirsty uncle. Mainly that he wasn't always quite so bloodthirsty. The DLC also gives more space to Suzuka, which was sorely needed. Her role in the base game was just to give exposition, which was not ideal, considering how important figure she is. And I don't mean that just in regards to the original legend of Ōtakemaru. She is not only Hide's mother, but also a yōkai, a very human-looking one at that. Surely there ought to be more to her than being a plot device? As I said before, Nioh2 makes her and Ōtakemaru siblings, which is, in my opinion, a smart move, because suddenly you have a dynamic that doesn't hinge on a stupid love triangle, but keeps the emotional closeness. You can also set them up as parallels, which is exactly what the game does. As we go through the DLC, we learn that Ōtakemaru and Suzuka lived among humans for a time, and that it was a peaceful coexistence, up until it wasn't. We are never told what exactly happened, if it was one event or multiple smaller things piling up, but the humans became fearful of Ōtakemaru, and they either threatened him or outright attacked, and Ōtakemaru retaliated, and bathed the village in blood. Suzuka was horrified by all the carnage, but nevertheless knew her brother won't stop unless forced to, and so the siblings split. Suzuka kept her belief that humans and yōkai can live in peace with each other, and that because some of them were fearful and thus aggressive, doesn't mean all of the humans are. whereas Ōtakemaru became disillusioned and came to the conclusion that peace with humans is a foolish notion and that humans should therefore be eradicated. Because duh, what else would you do with an enemy? There's also a possibility that Ōtakemaru didn't quite understand humans, not the way Suzuka seemingly did. Throughout the DLC, you can find bits and pieces of Ōtakemaru's thoughts and memories of his time among humans, and he often expresses confusion. One of his lines says, "I only killed the thief because I thought it was what they wanted. Why do the humans fear me? Why? I don't understand." His voice has such a bewildered tone to it, you can practically taste the confusion he's feeling. I mean, mood, my dude, humans are confusing. And so, both siblings take up arms and the local yōkai split into two camps. Those which believe in Suzuka's ideals and wish for peace with humankind, and those who see humans as prey or just fear Ōtakemaru too much to oppose him. It makes sense. When it comes to folktales featuring yōkai, not all of them are murderers, some are simply mischievous. And how would you prank humans if all humans were gone? And that is the situation Hide arrives into. But first, let me give you a bit more context for the DLCs in general. All of them involve Hide going back in time to meet and help previous wielders of Ōtakemaru, the yokai slaying blade. The first one they visit is Minamoto no Yoshitsune, and the second is Minamoto no Raiko, who has famously slain Shutendoji and who is a woman in Nioh universe. Oh, and we also meet Abe no Seimei in the second DLC so that none can accuse the game of not having enough legendary figures in it. One would think the DLCs would cover all of the three great evils, but considering Tamamo no Mae had her time to shine in one of the DLCs for the first Nioh, it's completely fair we take a look at Yoshitsune and his time among the Tengu of Mount Kurama, instead of her. And in the third one, we of course visit Ōtakemaru when he was still alive. Some of you probably realized where this is going the second I mentioned Hide and time travel in one sentence. And yeah, Hide takes on Tamuramaru's role as Ōtakemaru's slayer in both cases. You actually fight him like 4-5 times, but details. The DLCs all start the same way, Hide finding a picture scroll in an abandoned shrine, and Ōtakemaru reacting to the scroll, sending Hide tumbling backwards in time. Then a cutscene plays, as the stage for the story is set, giving some context to the player. It's the same case for the third DLC, only this time the cutscene opens with Suzuka's voice pitched high as she plays the storyteller. It's the same tale Suzuka tells at the very start of the game, about a mysterious man with horns coming into a village, only now it's made obvious that the story was about Ōtakemaru. We are reminded that there was peace between Ōtakemaru and the villagers at first, before fear gave birth to violence. This cutscene implies that Ōtakemaru was originally more human in appearance, only turning more monstrous once he started slaughtering people, almost as if his body got stained by blood and death. Ōtakemaru is often described as being the color of charcoal in the original legend, and the spirits of brutally murdered are depicted as black wisps in the game, so this change can be seen as Ōtakemaru being forever marked by what he did. Or it could be argued that his body transformed after he gave into his more primal urges, no longer needing the human face when he no longer had any empathy for humankind. We are also shown Suzuka, horrified but determined to oppose her brother and her guardian spirit, a dragon, golden in color. Curious. Anyway, Hide appears in a village full of dead bodies and yokai. Clearly a massacre took place here. It's unclear if this is the place of Ōtakemaru's initial slaughter or if it's some later victim. Though Suzuka's comment about how many armies were sent after Ōtakemaru and how they all failed to stop him makes suggest the latter. Because yes, it is Ōtakemaru who awaits Hide at the end of the village, and he's not about to let Hide pass without either killing them or recruiting them to his cause, with the sheer force of will and dark magic. Hide is saved from going completely berserk by Suzuka, who appears with several yokai at her side and stops Ōtakemaru, who then remarks that they dream of different futures and leaves. Upon seeing Hide properly, Suzuka recognizes that they carry the same light, Ōtakemaru, and also that they look like her brother when he was younger, thus confirming that Ōtakemaru and her are siblings, and that Hide takes after her side of the family more than Dawson's. Suzuka is determined to stop Ōtakemaru because she is the only one who can, and Hide of course goes to help. But since Ōtakemaru pulled his teleporting trick, we first have to get to him, which means we have to overcome the true final boss of the DLC, crabs. We also discover that Ōtakemaru is already amassing Amrita, thanks to the boss at the end of the first mission, Tate Ebushi, who comments on this before proceeding to step on you. After Hide's victory, Suzuka uses her guardian spirit as well as the Amrita presence in Tate Ebushi's lair to create Ōtakemaru, since the only thing that can hurt Ōtakemaru is something made of his own blood. Because he is essentially immortal, not thanks to his swords, but by his very nature. No human weapon could ever harm him. Suzuka, as his sister who shares his blood, could fell him, but would never be able to, because despite everything, it's still her beloved older brother. Thus, she makes a sword that contains the very essence of her. That might include her immortality as well, if both siblings share this trait, since Ōtakemaru is said to allow its wielder to live forever, and entrusts it to Hide, hoping that the young shiftling will be able to do what she cannot. However, this process weakens her and steals away a portion of her memories, so she can no longer assist Hide in person. She does share what she knows about her brother and his plans, of course. Ōtakemaru has built himself a fortress on a remote island, as opposed to the top of a mountain, and has been spreading his terror and influence over Japan. The island is full of sharp rocks and enormous bones, as well as yōkai, and boasts a dreadful atmosphere, truly a fitting seat of power for an evil yōkai lord. It is also isolated, which, as Nekomata, who is still following Hide around, remarks, reflects Ōtakemaru's loneliness. But just because he is sad boy doesn't mean he's any less angry, or perfectly willing to tear you into small pieces with his bare hands. And regardless of any personal feelings on the matter, it's up to Hide to storm Ōtakemaru's fortress to take him down for good. Or for the first time, if we look at it from the point of view that isn't Hide's. Time travel, am I right? On the way there, you can meet and save several yōkai who are on Suzuka's side, who are being held captive and probably also being tortured, indicating that Ōtakemaru gets soldiers for his cause by force, twisting the more peaceful yōkai into mindless feral beasts. We have seen him do this in the base game too, when the Red Moon appeared. The saved yōkai appear in the interim, where you can chat with them a bit and they thank you for your help. When Hide makes it to Ōtakemaru and brandishes Ōtakemaru, Ōtakemaru immediately recognizes that the sword came from Suzuka and appears to be remorseful that things escalated as much as they did. He probably hoped that Suzuka will soon see how naive her wishes are and will join him. But since that didn't happen, Ōtakemaru now has no reason to hold back. He forcefully absorbs his spirit, the Baku, and fuses with it, transforming his body into that of... I actually have no idea how to describe this. The game calls this boss Nightmare Bringer, which, yeah, that fits. Throughout the fight, Ōtakemaru expresses confusion as to why Hide is helping humans when they are, at least partially, a yōkai too. He doesn't want to actually know Hide's reasons, it's more that he doesn't understand how someone could reach a different conclusion from the one he did. In his mind, coexistence is a true impossibility, which is why Suzuka failed to talk him out of his murderous notions. After Hide slays Ōtakemaru, they get a small glimpse into his mind, and they see that despite his defeat, Ōtakemaru is now at peace, and he recognizes Hide as one of his own blood and thanks them, presumably for allowing him to pass. one of Ōtakemaru's horns, which Hide severed from his head, starts to glow, and the ghastly shade of Ōtakemaru's rage, the old man in monk's robes, starts rising from it. But Hide quickly stabs Sohoyamaru through the horn, sealing the shade in. Then they disappear, back to their own time, leaving behind confused Suzuka and Sohoyamaru. The scene then shifts, showing us Ōtakemaru walking on the waters of interim, looking human again. This is presumably taking place after Hide slays him for the final time in the base game, because Suzuka is already waiting for him there, and together they cross into the afterlife to find peace at last. That's my take on it, at least. Time travel makes this whole thing confusing. And since we are now at the very end of the game, it's time for the conclusion. So how does Nioh 2 retell the legend of Ōtakemaru? By shaking up some relations, stretching some timelines, and putting in a lot of OCs. Jokes aside, Nioh 2 takes surprisingly a lot from the original legend. There is a terrifying Oni called Ōtakemaru. He terrorized Japan during Heian period. The emperor ordered his men to slay him. This is more implied in Nioh 2, but Suzuka does say that countless armies were sent after Ōtakemaru, so I am counting this. It takes a special person to slay Ōtakemaru, Tamuramaro with his martial prowess and backing from a war god in the case of the original legend, and Hide in Nioh 2. Ōtakemaru can only be defeated with the help of Suzuka Gozen. In the original legend, she helps Tamuramaro spring a trap to steal Ōtakemaru's magic swords, and in Nioh 2 she creates the blade capable of slaying him. Ōtakemaru has to be slain twice to be fully gone. After being slain for the first time, Ōtakemaru's spirit has to slowly gather strength to gain a physical form back. He is slain the second time by the same person as the first time. Ōtakemaru's story is closely tied with Suzuka's. He has 3 magic swords. Nioh 2 is set in the Sengoku period and is, at the first glance, about the ascent and fall of Hideyoshi, about ambitions of man, and about Hide and their journey. But there is a surprising amount of space for Ōtakemaru too, even if he is the eminence in the shadows for most of the game. He is the villain of the story, the driving force behind everything, because ultimately this is a game about slaying monsters, so it stands to reason there should be a monster for you to slay at the very end of the journey. That being said, there is a sprinkle of commentary on fear, hubris and thirst for power to be found in the game. After all, Ōtakemaru picks his targets carefully, and it is much easier to influence someone who already considers their fellow men to be lesser. And let's not forget that Ōtakemaru literally became the monster others feared him to be because of that fear and the actions of men that stemmed from it. So yeah. I think Ōtakemaru makes for a good villain, and I think the game expanded his story and character in ways that make sense, while keeping his position as one of the 3 great evil yōkai undisputed. As much as we can sympathize and understand his issues, that doesn't change the fact that mass murder is wrong. And so is mind controlling people. The last pieces of Ōtakemaru that are left when the game story starts are his hatred and rage, which Suzuka in the DLC describes as being eternal. And I think there's something poetic about that. That even after his body is dead, the hatred continues to live on, not only in the form of the withered spirit, but also in the divide between human and yōkai. Because actions have consequences, and legacies can continue to exist across ages, be they good or bad. And hatred is a flame that dies so very slowly. And that's it on how Nioh 2 incorporates the legend of Ōtakemaru into its story. Hope you liked the video, hope you learned something new, and thank you again for your patience. This one took way longer than intended. The point of this video wasn't just to let me gush about one of my favorite games, it was to show why, in my opinion, the bits and pieces work together and to present an opportunity for learning something new. I have seen the story of Nioh 2 described as confusing several times, and that was one of the reasons for me making this video. While many people play Souls-likes purely for the gameplay, and that's totally valid, I think it'd be a shame to completely dismiss the story of Nioh2 just because it's rooted in Japanese history and folklore. Also, the game is such a masterful blend of real history with fantasy. Assassin's Creed wishes it was half as good as Nioh2. I said what I said. So like, comment and subscribe and pray for my soul, because considering how the making of this video went, the next two will most likely also grow legs and run away from me. Why is this like writing stories all over again? You blink and suddenly you're writing multi-chapter complex adventure instead of short one-shot. And so I am thinking about making a series of shorter videos to put in between these long ones. That way I can bring you content more regularly and more often. It's most likely going to be something to do with story analysis because that's what I know how to do and that's what I enjoy. I can also make a follow-up video to this one if anyone would like me to elaborate on things mentioned briefly, like the other two DLCs or something like that. I was thinking about making a shorter video explaining the bosses in a bit more detail for people who are curious about that. So let me know if that's something you would enjoy. A reminder that you can find me on various social media, links are in the description. If you want to support me, you can tip me on coffee. And until next time, safe journeys.